Hello and welcome to The Big Fight. Now, in the decade and a half that I've been doing this show, I thought I'd see all sorts of interesting headlines around the theme of big fights. And we've seen lots of big fights, right-wing and left-wing, Congress and BJP, Trinamool and CPM, India, Pakistan, India, China. But rarely would you think you would be seeing a topic like CBI versus CBI or CBI raids CBI. But these are interesting times that we live in. So that's almost exactly the sort of a headline that we've been seeing all week long, to the extent where we've actually seen matters around the CBI now going to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court's had to get into it. Now, all of this is known, and I'm sure you've seen any number of discussions on this all week long and have your own opinion on exactly what's happening. We on this show would like to look at a slightly broader theme, and that's the overall question of institutional integrity. We have actually debated this and discussed this on this show many times in the past, not just in this government, in previous governments as well. The concept of the caged parrot, as the CBI came to be known, the concept of other institutions becoming essentially agents of the government. And that's something which is never a good idea. Institutional independence and integrity is one of the cornerstones of any democracy. So it's the government has to function. There should be institutions like the media and the judiciary and the election commission, which should be, and by and large are regarded as completely independent of the government, although in recent years there have been accusations that even they aren't functioning entirely independently. And then, of course, you have agencies like the CBI or the Enforcement Directorate or the Income Tax Department or a whole range of other institutions closely affiliated with the government, which ideally should be independent, but their independence is often called into question. The term caged parrot is not new. So we would really like to look at all that's happening right now and perhaps try and step back a little bit and take a look at a broader question. What can be done to stop this? What can be done to reverse this? Because if the rule of the law and the rule of the Constitution is to really operate, then we have to have a proper system of checks and balances. So joining us now, many experts are going to help us understand this. Pinaki Mishra joining us, senior lawyer, Satish Pandishinde, criminal lawyers with us as well. Aruna Roy, social activist, joining us from Rajasthan. Adil Singh Boparai, spokesperson of the Congress Party, is here with us. Desh Ratan Nigam, political analyst, Supreme Court lawyer, right-thinking, a thinker of the right, if I can call him that. Great to have you with us. Vineet Narayan, senior journalist. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Jaydev Ranade, former additional secretary, Raw. Good to have you with us as well. And Navneet Rajan Vasan, who's former joint director at the CBI and perhaps one of the people who can really help us understand exactly what's happening inside the CBI. So great to have all of you with us. Aruna Roy, should I start off with you, because the overall theme is something which you and others have been talking about for a while right now. The broader issues and the broader themes must be something that are causing some concern. Are we seeing an overall erosion in institutional independence and institutional integrity?
I think that we are. Actually, institutions like the Central Information Commission, the National Human Rights Commission, the EC, the CBI now, actually these are institutions which record the health of the government and indeed of the country and the state. Now these institutions are being steadily corroded from the time of appointment, when actually the appointments which we made by a completely independent panel and least of government interference and influence. And that's why when the RTI Act was formulated, we wanted the head of government, but also the head of the opposition, and we actually wanted the Chief Justice of India. And at that point, for some odd reason, the Chief Justice was not put into the panel, and they had a minister of the government. But ideally, it should be the Chief Justice, it should be the Prime Minister, and it's the leader of the opposition, appointing every head of every independent commission. And now, with the kind of travesty of governance that we are seeing, we really need people monitoring. And the people monitoring, for us, can only be through transparency.
Right.
Initially,
So
the
RTI
CBI.
and the CIC are one route to take, but let's also step back for a minute and try and think this through. What are the bodies that should be completely independent of the government and which may require a certain amount of government control or supervision? So obviously the courts, goes without saying, have to be completely independent. Election Commission should be completely independent. CIC should be completely independent. What about what are called the agencies, you know, the CBI, the ED, income tax? Should these be run as agents? I mean, they are agencies of the government. How independent should they be?
I think I would not put the CBI and the Income Tax Department in the same bracket, because when I was in the government for that very brief period, I looked at taxation. Taxation is very different from investigation and from adjudication of justice. So I would really look at the CBI as a very important part of the justice system. And therefore, it has to have a fair degree of independence, and it must have integrity in terms of its appointment. But probably in your big fight, we are now seeing falsity against falsity, lack of integrity versus lack of integrity, when we are talking of the very basic structure of these institutions. Transparency and accountability become a very important part of it. We're also looking at, apart from investigative procedures, the rest of it being transparent, and therefore the fear of exposure to public scrutiny being part of the working of that system.
Okay, I think you've given us a lot to think about. Vineet Narayan, let me get you in on this as well, because you've quite often been associated with questions about how the CBI, you know, can be fixed and can be reformed and the extent of independence. What is it that you have come across?
You will recall that the famous judgment of 1997, Vineet Narayan judgment, which granted autonomy to CBI, CVC. I would say today that it has not been implemented in letter and spirit. The first sabotage was by the parliamentary committee which formed the bill for this as per the direction. The politicians, member of that committee, I approached them personally and said, why you are diluting the directions of Supreme Court? But they didn't listen, they went ahead.
Just what exactly was said in the judgment, in the judgment which actually almost bears your name, the Vineet Narayan judgment? Yeah. What exactly was said at that time?
A lot of instructions were given to ensure transparency and accountability, but this bill which was drafted, CBC Act and all these things, they diluted a lot of things. Especially the single directive which we got removed from Supreme Court, they brought it back, you know, later on. That's one. Now, in 21 years, what we have seen, there is a complete misuse of CBI by the successive government. Whichever government has been in power, they misuse CBI to settle their score with political opponents. That is established fact. You cannot deny that. Secondly, there have been successive directors with allegations of corruption. You had Ranjit Sinha meeting, hobnobbing with the accused. You had AP Singh, you know, with Qureshi case. And now you have this saga, which is very depressing and frustrating. So I think because CBI's reforms or whatever the directives are have not been implemented in letter and spirit, it is high time that I go back to the Supreme Court demanding a thorough rethinking by a larger bench.
And would you extend that to other agencies? Because what you're saying about the CBI could be extended to other agencies also.
Because we are still in the process of drafting a petition.
So you're going to go back to the Supreme Court?
Yes, next week I'm filing a petition which is nothing to do with present crisis. This is one of the examples.
Yeah. Present crisis will hopefully. Yeah.
Let me tell you that even in UPA government's time, last few months, Archana Ramasundram was appointed the additional director of CBI. She was DG Police Tamil Nadu. This was done bypassing CBC Act and Vineet Narayan judgment. So I went to the court and I got a stay. She could not join and finally she had to go away. But the interesting thing is that 2 years when I fought in the Supreme Court, in between NDA government came. And even NDA government started supporting her. So, which means, you know, whichever.
So you're saying that the desire of governments to misuse the agencies is independent of party and other affiliation. Now you can argue as to who's worse. Just let me get you in on this because, I mean, having been joint director of the CBI, I mean, if you look at countries like America, one of the things that is shining out right now, although there is absolute mayhem that is taking place in the United States at the highest level, as we can see, one of the things that people are pointing to is that the system of checks and balances seems to be enduring, well, relatively well, that the FBI is being able to stand up to the President of the United States. Clearly, that's not happening right now. Do you think the CBI should be entirely independent, as was being mentioned, or do you think that's not always a good idea?
There has to be institutional integrity and institutional autonomy. That is extremely important for any organization which is investigating to do proper, fair and impartial investigation. Apart from this, one factor which has not been mentioned is that you need to induct capable officers. It's extremely important. We cannot overlook the capacity of the officers to investigate, because one person, one officer who is not good enough to investigate can land some officer or the other.
But can I just ask a question, sir? On that question is where who the capable person is and what the person is supposed to do. Now that's where many questions will rest, because the government of the day will sometimes feel that the person you should appoint as the head of the CBI or the head of one of the other agencies is somebody who can help them implement whatever it is that they want to do, which might, by the way, mean going after people who are inconvenient or asking too many questions or who are opponents of the government. That might become, or a certain amount of pliability, that might become one of the more important criteria for any government to appoint a chief. And by the way, it's not that that's not been happening all this time.
No, it's not only the chief, it is number of officers when they are inducting. There has to be a mechanism, because the present mechanism has obviously failed. And I personally believe that at the level of the Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition and Chief Justice of India, they have no means to examine the credentials of number of people whose files are put before them for selection. Yeah. And so is true of additional directors, special directors, SPs, DIGs, who are selected by a committee headed by CVC. Number of officers who are of dubious character have entered into the organization, because you are now finding that there are allegations against the person who has been made interim director, who is a joint director. So these kind of people should not be able to get in. So there has to be more robust and transparent mechanism. Now, I don't have a ready formulation to give it that this will be the mechanism, but we have to sit down and work out. It is in the national interest. It is in the interest of not only CBI, but organization like Enforcement Directorate. At the same time, you cannot give complete autonomy to an organization, because there is always a risk of organization running amok or people becoming rogue. So there has to be a proper system of checks and balances.
Okay, so two interesting things. How are you selecting people here, and B, how do you make sure that they have autonomy and independence without having so much independence that they actually run amok? Let me just get two legal minds into this. Satish Manishende, Pinaki Mishra, both joining us. Pinaki Mishra, let me start with you first. Where should institutional autonomy run till? Because whether we like it or not, it has increasingly become the trend, and it's been a slide for a while, that all of these agencies effectively end up functioning on the behalf of the government of the day. And sometimes, as we're seeing right now, there's questions about which faction on whom each side is, various people are representing.
Vikram, just a very quick caveat that, as you said, I'm here purely as a lawyer, not in my capacity as a member of parliament or as somebody who represents the Biju Janata Dal. What I'm going to say is completely in my personal capacity, not as a party representative, so therefore that should be clarified. Now, straight away answer to your question, that's not even the problem today, according to me. This is now a given that political parties are going to use these agencies for their own ends. What has become alarming now, and it's clear today that the Supreme Court is seized of this alarm, is that there is obviously now so much corruption that this has gone way beyond government controlling these agencies. The agencies now have run completely rogue, and they've become extortion agencies, and therefore the Honorable Supreme Court had to actually fall back upon a retired judge of the Supreme Court, Justice Patnaik, who, may I say, from Orissa, man of unimpeachable integrity and great legal acumen. But he is now having to supervise this, because obviously the Honorable Supreme Court has felt that the CVC's supervision or oversight of this matter is not good enough, or may not be appropriate enough. Now, therefore, what is alarming is forget the fact that governments have been misusing the CBI and the ED and the DRI and the income tax for decades. Every political party who's been at the center in power, has been guilty of it brazenly. There's no question. But now it's gone beyond that because of that kind of institutional abuse that has taken place at the hands of political parties. What is happening now is these agencies now feel that, well, if you're going to be used by the government, why don't we also on the side do a little bit for ourselves? And that's really extraordinary that you don't have a single officer now who can form part of the SIT to even look into these matters. I mean, that's how alarming it is for the Supreme Court. The state police agencies and the state vigilance authorities, in that sense appear to be much better equipped to handle things. In Orissa, the chit fund was being investigated, for instance, by the state vigilance. They went very far in, blocking the rot. And then suddenly the Supreme Court said, bring the CBI in. And what we've seen for the last 4 years is a complete sham. So therefore,
But,
really,
Pinaki, you did say you don't want to get the state into it. Otherwise, I was about to ask you questions about Orissa also misusing powers like what you're doing with at IRL, Abhijit may not be a person whose views I always agree with.
No, but the state has not
the use
misused
of
its power. The
state
CBI
power
has misused
to
its power
take
there.
somebody for saying something and lock him up is something that we do need to address. As I'm saying, I may not always agree with his views, but I will defend his rights to express those views without being locked up. And that's what Orissa has done right now.
No, there's no roughing up at all. On the contrary, Vikram, FIRs have been filed and the gentleman has been treated with kid gloves, let me tell you. Despite
I don't mean roughing him up as in being beating him up. The fact that he's in prison for expressing his views is something. You may not agree with his views, but the fact is he has a right to express those views without being
You have
locked
to
up.
go and get bail. I mean, that's the law of the land. Unfortunately, the state is only following the law of the land. I mean, if he is to be arrested, he has to go and seek bail. That's it. Vikram, he went to the Supreme Court of India and the Chief Justice of India said the safest place for you is jail because of what you've done. Now, after that, it's very difficult for the state to say anything.
Okay, separate discussion, separate argument. I would like to return to that theme because I think that also goes at the heart of institutions and freedom. Satish Manishende, let me get you in. What's just been said by Pinaki, that agency after agency is now settling scores because people are bribing somebody or the other, or an officer is being bribed, or there's corruption, and then agencies are being used, because that then really weakens people's faith in institutions in general, and that's a really serious issue for us.
All our systems, all the executive, the legislature, some portions of the judiciary, they're all corrupt. So therefore a time has come when the Supreme Court rightly interfered in this entire episode because in spite of the fact that in Vineet Narayan's case as well as Prakash Singh's case, Supreme Court has laid down guidelines as to how these officers must be appointed and the investigating machineries must function within the corners of the law. And in spite of the Supreme Court making a statement that the CBI was a cage parrot, nothing seems to have affected the CBI because year after year where directors or former directors of CBI have been accused of corruption. I do not want to name them, but there have been at least 4 incidents in the last 10 years where the CBI directors have been named exclusively for various acts of corruption. The government in this present case felt that both number 1 and 2 were not seeing eye to eye, number 1. Secondly, there were charges of corruption made against each other in the same case, in Moin Qureshi's case. And, the very fact that the CBI director was selected by a panel of the Prime Minister, the Leader of Opposition and the Chief Justice of India, it is a matter of concern that some allegations must be made against him. So therefore, the Supreme Court is right in appointing a Supreme Court judge to oversee the entire investigation because allegations were made against the CVC that it was not acting fairly. So this is a matter of concern not only for the courts but also the every citizen of the country. That earlier we thought that if the state police machinery was not acting according to law, we could all approach the CBI. But if even the CBI is full of muck, then it's a matter of grave concern. We do not know where the entire investigating machinery is going to lead and produce evidence in court of law. Apart from all this, had it been in the American system, the FBI director would have been dismissed in no time. would be having a new one just now.
But you know, that's
And
exactly the problem. When the
feel that
executive
if,
starts to being
this
able to
is a
dismiss
situation-
people like this, then it becomes the minute a member of the CBI or, you know, whichever agency it is not doing the bidding of the government, if the government can dismiss that person, there is an issue. It's not quite that simple to fire the head of the FBI in America. Look at the number of years Hoover was able to stay on, and even later, it's not that easy to do it. I mean, Trump has tried, and it's not proving quite that simple. The fact of the matter is, and this is where people will start to step back and saying, what is going on? Because he's right. Allegations against both sides, allegations about anybody you choose to appoint, there can be a fresh set of allegations. Theoretically, the interim director, right now, there's allegations against him as well. Whom do you trust? Look just, for example, at the sort of exchanges we have seen from some of the top politicians in this nation over the last few days. Arun Jaitley, Rahul Gandhi, just hear some of this.
इंस्टीट्यूशन को नरेंद्र मोदी जी ने नष्ट करने का काम किया है। मैं आपसे कहना चाहता हूं कि हम आप पर आक्रमण नहीं कर रहे हैं, आप पर आक्रमण प्रधानमंत्री कर रहा है।
Fairness of our principal investigative agencies are maintained. And regarding the charge that you said 3 opposition parties have made, I regard this charge as a rubbish. And the fact that 3 opposition parties are saying, we know what the agency was going to do next, itself casts a serious doubt on the fairness process.
You know, this is where where the degradation of institutions starts to have an effect. Look at the sort of charges that are being made. Cases are being filed. Enforcement Directorate has just come out and filed a charge sheet against the person who was the finance minister of the UPA government, UPA coming in and saying political vendetta.
What we're witnessing is an implosion of institutions. I think that's a key takeaway of the current saga. This is point number 1. Point number 2, since we're talking about the broader issue, I think let's take the ED for example. Rajeshwar Singh is accusing Hasmukh Adhia, another blue-eyed officer of Mr. Modi from Gujarat, of taking bribe from Nirav Modi. You have 4 judges of the Honorable Supreme Court coming out in the media and saying that democracy is in peril, that there is incessant governmental interference in judicial administration. You have the CEC, who's virtually become a rubber stamp. You have the RBI, who's become an extension of the finance ministry. So one thing is clear, that Modi and Amit Shah's model of governance is failing India. This is point number 2. Point number 3, what you see today is the Supreme Court interdicting the BJP's attempt to emasculate the CBI. Now let's take the case of the interim director. The Supreme Court has said that he cannot take any policy decision, number 1. Number 2, all transfers or change of IOs which has been done by him is under the scanner and now has to be submitted to the Supreme Court. Number 3, the Supreme Court has no faith in the CVC probe. Otherwise, they would not direct supervision by a retired judge of the Supreme Court. So it's quite clear that this is a setback for the BJP government. And then upon this, Mr. Verma.
Cage parrot though came when the UPA was.
Well, it's become a dead parrot now. It's become a dead parrot. But let me go further. Alok Verma.
Is that a relief or not a relief?
No, the point is the situation is worsening. Alok Verma, in his petition, I've gone through the pleadings, on oath says that I am handling 7 critical cases, 7 sensitive cases, and I've been arbitrarily removed. And now you must have read the Indian Express report. One of those 7 cases happened to be the Rafael case. So why is it that this government, in a midnight coup at 2:30 at night, suddenly removes him, sanitizes the entire CGO complex, seals the 10th floor? These are questions which Mr. Modi needs to answer. DOPT comes under him.
Okay, let me throw that to you. Is this government worse than previous governments in this?
I deny the second portion, which is saying it is worse, which means the earlier portion of bad stands if I admit his statement. It was bad at that point of time, and I'm denying the second portion. If the agencies are working, it will always be...
Are you saying that the agencies are more independent now than they were earlier?
Yes, otherwise such kind of a thing would...
In what way? Which head of institution has been appointed?
Let me establish my point. A personal dispute between 2 public officers has been converted into an independence of CBI. Please remember, these are 2 different issues. 2 IPS officers having a private war in public. It's an issue of misconduct and indiscipline. And there I agree with a lot of panelists that
the CBI director has told the Supreme Court, it's not a personal matter, the
What
CBI
told?
director has told the Supreme Court of India, I have been removed because I was taking certain investigations in a direction which were not suiting the government of the day.
That's an afterthought,
Wow,
not supported.
that's a rather
No, that's an afterthought, not supported by any documents. Both of them are under investigation. They have to justify. When CBI does something wrong, whom do you blame? Straight away Mr. Modi or the elected government? Right? The person who is responsible for appointing them is also accountable for any misdeeds.
Yeah.
So you're framing a responsibility and fastening a responsibility on the Prime Minister or the elected government, but he has once you make the agency so independent that the person is although accountable for the misdeeds of CBI, but is not have no control over the CBI is a very important question.
Okay, it's a really good question. Hang on, it's a very good question, and I want to I want to turn to that now. How do you make appointments? How do you manage these institutions so that there is effective control over it? You can hold the government accountable, or should you not hold the government accountable? If the CEC is doing something wrong, or the Supreme Court is doing something wrong, you don't blame Mr. Modi necessarily because of the
those are constitutional posts. This is not a constitutional post.
But maybe they should become a constitutional post. I want to ask Vinny,
not
what
at
does
all.
he think should be done?
You will be creating another pillar apart from judiciary, parliament and executive. You will be raising a parallel a pillar which will be more dangerous for democracy.
Okay, so let's turn to an organization, Mr. Nande. That's what I want to ask you. Raw, for that extent, has been able to stay aloof from that. But are there any lessons from that that the others can apply?
I think there are 2 or 3 points I'd like to make. Firstly, I think Adil did mention, and so did he, that this deterioration or this rot has set in quite some time ago. You remember the phrase about committed bureaucracy and all. That is when the move first started. Second, it is the individual who makes the organization, really speaking. And we haven't paid attention to the kind of individuals we are bringing in. And I come to the question that you asked. Now, procedures exist. Any officer of the rank of Joint Secretary and above who is taken in an organization, he has to be vetted and a vigilance clearance has to be given. If that was done in the case of the CBI, how come suddenly we read that every second officer has investigations going against him? The appointments
But I mean, just the framing of charges doesn't necessarily mean anything, because it's the easiest thing in the world these days to put charges against anybody. May be correct, may not be correct. Anybody can make a charge against anybody, and given the way the defamation laws work, you know, if you go against it, you'll be 10 years in court anyway.
But, I mean, the charges have been made. I'm not saying that they're right or wrong. We'll see. Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is that when cases are put up, for example, when this special committee comprising the Prime Minister, the Chief Justice and the Leader of the Opposition sat to decide on who should be the Director of the CBI, they would have been presented a list of names, a panel of names. They are not going to go and check each individual unless they happen to know it personally. I don't think the organizations, agencies included, should be absolutely independent. They need a modicum of supervision. What kind of supervision can be worked out, but each one needs to be supervised by the government to see that they don't run amok, to see that they don't exceed their brief, and to see that they don't harass the citizen. After all, it is for him. Finally, let me just say, the concept of the civil servant was to be anonymous.
On the last part that you said, any organization that is under the influence of the government of the day will be used to harass citizens, political rivals, anybody who's inconvenient. That's a logical outcome.
I don't
That's
agree
what's
with
happening
that.
Across the board.
If you have strong officers there, if you have officers who are not hankering for something else, you probably will have a better situation. But all governments are going to try and misuse these organizations, and that's why I started off by saying it depends on the individual in the organization.
Okay, so now let me try and come to solutions. Let me get all of you in on this. Let me start with you, Vineet Narayan, because you are saying you're going back to the Supreme Court to try and update what you've been trying to do for so many decades to try and get a system around this. How do you fix the system? What's the right way to do it?
Ready solutions are not available at this point of time. Based on our experience of 21 years, we have thought of certain solutions. And today only I have approached a number of IPS officers throughout the country who are in touch with me to give their feedback on what should be the mechanism. I would remind you what Chanakya Pandit said about institution, and he said, no matter what institution you create, if the individual running the institution is not honest, you cannot guarantee. उन्होंने बोला है कि शहद की रखवाली करने वाले के होठों पर शहद लगा होगा. तो ये बड़ी एक ज़रूरी बात है कि the individual must be of high integrity, and I agree with the panelists that selection process requires much more thinking now, because this system has not delivered. That's one. Second thing is that
we have, by the way, what Chanakya said, even the finance minister Arun Jaitley has said that the top two in the CBI should be like Caesar's wife, entirely above suspicion, which is fine, but I guess that same principle should apply across all organizations.
Yes, to all organizations. Second thing is that the monitoring part, as he rightly said, that if you give total freedom to CBI, it's going to be draconian. As it is, I do agree with Pinaki about the extortionist character of CBI, and the only thing I don't disagree that it has started recently. Way back in 93 when I filed CBI, the Hawala case, Ram Jethmalani was my lawyer, and you know what he used to tell me? Vineet, every time you file an affidavit with evidences against accused, the CBI officials do your puja because they get more money to keep silent about that. And there is still my application pending in the Supreme Court where investigation has not taken place in that case. So this is very important, that what kind of monitoring you do, how you do. Has CBC been able to perform their duties? When you talk to CBC members, they say we don't have power. When you give them power, then CBI says it is an interference in our term. I've been interacting with both CBI and CBC, and we are trying
and
to...
as I'm going on saying, you can extend this from CBI to other institutions also. Let me just get Aruna Roy back into this. Aruna, how do you solve this problem?
It's a deliberate destruction of institutions by the system, that the political system, because they cannot really play with power unless they have these institutions under control. It depends on which party to which degree, but in the last 4 years, many institutions have been weakened, and the Lokpal is still not in place, which should have overseen the institutions. Of course, nothing should be autonomous totally, and not accountable laterally and to an organization above itself. But should the government, with the Prime Minister, be whom they report to, when they're actually looking at the integrity within government?
So the problem with the Lokpal, ma'am, then becomes, assuming you have the Lokpal overseeing that, what happens if there are problems with the Lokpal? That would be the question.
One moment.
So that's always the issue. That.
No, 1 second. This Lokpal that we have got on draft today is also accountable. It's not independent. The previous draft of the Lokpal has been set aside. So I think one should read the law. I don't have the time to go into it, but let me tell you that there's been a recent move, and I think that's where we have to link the dots. There's been a recent move that in fact the UPSC must not control the recruitment of IAS officers, but the director of the National, the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy of Administration, and he should give, or she should give the final marks, and then they should be properly oriented. Now what does this mean? Because the academy is totally under the control of the government, whereas the UPS is still an independent body, and your selection process still is fairly uncriticized. It's a process which most of us have accepted. The committed bureaucrat is committed to the constitution, not to the government and power.
Quite often the path to growth is not from allegiance to the constitution. The path to growth is allegiance to a particular political party, or even worse, a particular leader or two leaders.
But Vikram, isn't that what's wrong with the system?
Of course that's what's wrong with the system. 100% that's what's wrong with the system. I'm trying to figure out how we can fix that.
A bureaucracy that's created to deliver justice.
Yes.
If it's going to get influenced all the time by the politicians in power,
I completely agree with you.
You can cry till the cows come home.
All institutions, ma'am, should have allegiance to the constitution, and if there's any other body that they should have allegiance to other than the constitution, it should only be the people of the country. It shouldn't be any political party or any political leader. Pinaki Mishra, looking for solutions right now. How are you going to fix this? We all, I think, agree that this is a absolute disastrous situation to be in as a nation if our institutional integrity and autonomy is being called into doubt.
I think we've hit nadir. So,
don't, please don't bet on that. Please don't bet on that. I tell you, I've been doing shows about institutional
but Vikram,
degradation for 8 years now, or maybe 10 years now, and every time we say on the big fight, it can't get any worse, and it does get worse. So, let's not say that. You have no idea what could happen next.
Vikram, look, let's be honest. Look, 100% of the officers are obviously not corrupt, both in the IAS, the IPS,
100%
the IRS. They are not 100% corrupt. There's no, there are a large number who are corrupt. Now, the important thing is, the government of the day, Vikram, always knows, because the agencies at hand that they have at their command, they always know who are the corrupt officers and who are the honest officers. Now, the political leadership, it is incumbent upon the political leadership, therefore, and in these matters, it is the political leadership which has to count, because they are the ones who under the constitution are elected by the people to serve the people. It is for the political leadership to then stay away from the lure of appointing corrupt officers, because
Pinaki,
they are bound to do their bidding.
But Pinaki, that's so obviously not going to be the solution, because the political parties or the government of the day, irrespective of the government, they will always want to appoint an officer whom they think they can control. Why would any political party or government of the day, in the present system, we have to try and change the system, why would they want to appoint somebody who is unimpeachable integrity, completely honest, and will resist any political interference? They won't want to appoint an officer like that, because it won't be convenient for them.
Look, it is incumbent upon the political leadership to rise to the occasion and do it. Otherwise,
I'm not going to hold in my breath waiting for that.
I want to give you a very interesting example. Many years back, I came to know that one joint secretary in Ministry of Petroleum was thoroughly corrupt. So I went to the minister with the name that this guy is very corrupt in your ministry. Please take care of him. The minister was very happy. What is his name? He noted the name, kept it in the pocket. When I came out, my friends asked, what happened? I said, this is what happened. He said, now you made his day. That joint secretary will get the most prize posting now, because minister has come to know.
Did he?
Yes, it happened.
Oh my God. Okay, Satish Manishinde, now that Mr. Vineet Narayan has just depressed us further by saying that what Pinaki was saying, and I think Pinaki was expressing a hope. Perhaps I was being a bit more cynical to saying that I think it's the exact opposite that's going to happen, that only people who the government thinks that they can act on their agenda will actually be rising. But who knows, maybe Pinaki, maybe suddenly things will change dramatically. Satish Manishinde, looking for solutions.
Well, first of all, one has to realize that the present CBI director was appointed by a committee of the Prime Minister, the Leader of Opposition and the Chief Justice. So they made an attempt by searching for him amongst 45 officers who were shortlisted. So it cannot be faulted that they found the best person available. But even if that best person available is accused of various kinds of corruption, one has to realize that our entire system, entire polity is full of corruption. The corruption, flows through majority of Indians' blood. So it's not something which can be corrected over a period of time. It has to be a disciplined society. It has to be working in the national interest. There is no national spirit. There is no regard for human life. There is no regard for honesty. There is no regard for integrity. And therefore,
Satish, you're depressing us now so much that we're all going to switch off.
Policing system.
Satish, now you're really, really depressing us. And I'm also not sure that's entirely and completely fair.
No, I'm not saying so. In spite of the Supreme Court saying so many times, in so many cases, the Supreme Court has time and again framed guidelines. Even if this is not working, even if the director who was selected by the August committee is not working, then where do we go? So you have to realize that even the one who has been appointed as the acting director of the CBI, he is being accused of various forms of corruption. So therefore, whom will you appoint? Whom will you select?
As I said, allegations aren't necessarily true unless they're proven. I have to say that as one point. And B, I refuse to believe that there are not hundreds of millions of honest Indians with unimpeachable integrity, and it is our job to find them and make sure that they are.
There are, but then how do you locate them?
Okay, that's a different issue. That's a different issue, and that's something which we are going to try and find answers to. But I don't think we should give up on India and Indians and say that everyone is corrupt, so therefore we'll never be able to find everyone. I'm sure there are enough people who can be found. How do you find them?
No, therefore, if the government has come with a heavy-handed...
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying, and I understand where that despair is coming from, but I'm saying I'm sure there should be a path forward.
You see, there has to be, as I said in the beginning, now we have to change our selection
If we're to go
because no
forward
committee,
now,
by looking at the papers, can decide the credentials of an officer. Now, as I said, the officer has to be of high integrity, he has to be of very, very sound competence. Previously, there was a time-tested method by which officers were inducted in CBI. That is, at the top level, only those officers who had earlier worked as SP, DIG or Joint Director were taken at the top level. So, at least their background was known to an extent. I don't say that all of them were beyond impeachable of integrity. They were bad sheep then also. But then there was some system which was prevailing. But for the past 10 years, unfortunately, at the top level, if you see the data, in CBI, officers who have never worked in CBI have coming at the top position, that is of Joint Director and above, which is really creating a problem because they have to supervise a large number of officers who actually investigate.
Sometimes you can get people in from outside who are very good. It's not that they are not good people who are coming in.
I am not denying that. I am not denying that. And talent should always be welcome.
Okay.
But, these officers have to supervise the working of junior officers who are really, as it's being told that it has become an extortionate organization. Okay.
All right. I'm starting to run out of time on the show. Let me get final thoughts from everyone, including you, sir. Solutions. I'm still hoping to get solutions.
Well, as I said, procedures have to be implemented. Procedures are already laid down. They have to be brought in so that we get honest people in, professionally competent people in. And there are two things going in this favor. One is the spoken reputation of an officer, and the second is the annual confidential report. Both are important. The second, I would say, and I'll go from what Mr. Mishra and Manishender said, at the risk of making you more depressed. Corruption has really got into the system. And the number of cases of people purchasing their posts, you'd be aware of the report about the railways and all that, has really reached alarming proportions. And this is, I wouldn't be surprised if a similar thing is happening here. That
people
has to be
purchasing stopped. You're right, you did depress me further. This is, okay, let's come to the both of you. Because look, logically speaking, it should be possible to say, here are really, really good officers. Look at the ACRs, as he's saying. Look at their spoken reputation. But the question will then come, it is still in the interest of any government of the day to not necessarily pick the person with the best reputation, but to pick the most blind person. Is the solution therefore, and it's been tried, I mean, that's what theoretically is supposed to be happening even with the CBI director, leader of the opposition, prime minister, maybe chief justice of the Supreme Court, get 3 or 4 other people, sit down and think, let's appoint somebody, and maybe get all parties to come and agree on a system like that.
See, one thing, all political parties have to behave responsibly. Not that when you lose elections, you start blaming CEC and EVM. We have to get out of that mode and try to keep the nation first. And secondly, end of the day, it is the people of this country, we the people of this country, your preamble starts. Therefore, you have to involve parliament rather than creating various layers of accountability who are not answerable to the people. So therefore, some kind of a parliamentary committee must come into the selection process.
Not a bad idea. Again, it's not a bad idea.
And therefore,
why can't you have a parliamentary committee?
And therefore, it is the people who will be directly responsible through the elected representative to make that selection process. You may shortlist a panel, but that panel has to go before a parliamentary committee which must discuss it thoroughly.
Okay.
And become a part of public
What's wrong with that idea? Actually, it's not a bad idea at all. A parliamentary committee, like you have in the US. I'm again coming back to the US. At the end of the day, whatever the executive appoints has to go up to the Senate committee. It's not even Lok Sabha, it's the Rajya Sabha, right? So you can take it to the Rajya Sabha and maybe the Lok Sabha also. Have a televised hearing. Let it all be heard out. Let people make up their mind as the right person being appointed or not.
Well, I think it can certainly be considered. Anything which cleans up the system, which makes the system pure, should be considered. But let's come to the genesis of today's problem. The problem is that
from here only.
No, please understand. Mr. Asthana was thrust onto the CBI. He was foisted on the CBI despite serious allegations against
we've
him,
almost reached a
despite
solution.
vigilance objections against him. Had this government followed the letter of law, had they convened a meeting of the selection committee, this entire crisis could have been salvaged.
But
this
you're saying his
government was
suggestion is not a
sitting-
bad suggestion. I'm
Well,
trying to
I
end
think
the
it's
big
his
fight by
party.
not having a big fight, but reaching a solution.
Well,
Would you agree with this
Nagpur
idea?
has the remote control. Nagpur has the remote control. They should perhaps tell Mr. Modi to come up with a proposal.
I want to add something. The students sitting here can tell you who of their class fellow comes from a corrupt family background or honest family background. Today with WhatsApp and internet media and everything, it's quite possible for government to find out who are the honest people, who are the corrupt people.
Actually, I would not agree with you at all on that.
No, no.
Because if you're going to base it on WhatsApp messages,
No, no,
if you're going to base, I mean, my
No, no,
God, by
I'm-
now all of us should be in prison.
I'm coming to the solution point. Biodata.
I can show you at least 1,000 WhatsApp messages which are
Don't
absolutely
get
wrong.
stuck to WhatsApp. Biodata of the eligible candidate can be put on website for 3 months, 2 months, some period for objections to be invited.
Okay.
How it is that once he is appointed, people will start coming up with the complaints against him.
That's not
So
a bad
it should
idea.
be more
Aruna
transparent.
Roy, just before you leave us, quick thought. Select committee which can take a look at these issues. Is that a possibility which you think might be the right way? Parliament, Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, have a televised hearing, try and copy that from the Americans?
I think that's a very good idea, and that it should be televised, but it's also something which should be through a multi-party committee, so that
Okay.
we don't have to play into the politics of a single party.
I think that's what the idea is, and I think it's a great idea. So, okay, fine, we've got somewhere. I think we've got a good idea. Let's see whether that idea can be implemented. Let me just come to people out here. Quick thoughts, anybody?
Sir said that the case parrot has been dead now. I would like to know, how will you bring that dead parrot back to life again?
That's exactly
Well, I think you have to vote out the BJP. You have to bring in a clean government, and we will restore the rule of law in this country.
Okay, fine. I was hoping to stay away from politics out here. All right, that's all we have time for right now. Let's see if we can try and find a way to restore the credibility, the integrity, and the reputation of these institutions. At the end of the day, what makes a nation are its people and the institutions that represent and serve the people. So the minute questions start to come over the institutions that are behind a nation, it's really one of the most serious things that we can have. We have to try and find a way of restoring their autonomy, their integrity, and the credibility of what they actually stand for. We've heard some really interesting suggestions in the course of this program. Let's hope some of them actually come to life. You're watching The Big Fight. We'll be back next week.